Today I'm joined with Guillermo Riveria. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How is it reporting on the MLS and American soccer? How is that?
MLS here, it's challenging because the demand for the league itself hasn't been as as fervent as it is for the NBA or Major League Baseball, or it's definitely not the NFL. It's probably closer to the NHL, the National Hockey League, in terms of overall attention, but it's not quite there yet. So the audience that you're speaking to is usually a little bit smaller than what you're accustomed to seeing here in the States from the other big four professional sports, they call them. But the fan bases are still very passionate about their teams. They are, the league is still growing, and there are pains associated with that growth. But it's it's not as prevalent as the other American sports, obviously, but it's still like I said, there is still a following for it here.
How do you think that soccer in America competes with, like you said, the NBA, NHL, and hockey? Like, how difficult is that for it to compete with those sports?
Yeah, the NBA is still sort of a juggernaut, and in some of these leagues, in baseball and the NBA, I mean, they've got 70-year head starts on MLS here in terms of building a following for the league itself and for those teams that are participating in each one of the leagues. In terms of uh, audiences and TV viewership eyes, it's probably closer to the NHL than it is the NBA. I think the rating numbers and the actual eyes viewing them on television are still not what those other four sports are, but they're within, I think, striking distance of the NHL. Their attendance figures are certainly, in terms of average attendance for each match, are on par with the NHL and the NBA. NBA obviously has more games, NHL as well, but I think that the getting the live audiences excited and attending matches here is that's been accomplished. I think establishing a wider range of viewers and interest is something they're still working on.
How has international players like David Beckham, Ibrahimovic helped to develop the MLS?
Yeah, anytime you bring in one of those guys, I had a chance to speak to Ibrahimovic when he was here in Chicago, and he was exactly what you would imagine Ibrahimovic to be. And those guys, anytime you bring in guys of that profile and that magnitude, that amount of talent, it's going to draw attention to your league, and it's going to draw eyes that wouldn't typically watch MLS to the television or the stadium. For each one of those guys, every time they were in Chicago, they drew media attention. Reporters that you'd never see were out there. TV stations that you never see were out at the game trying to speak with him. So anytime that those guys, even if they are, and I think both of those guys could play when they came here, and that was evidence because they went elsewhere in major leagues with major teams after leaving MLS. So each one of those guys, I think, drew exactly what they were. They accomplished what they came here to do, and that was attract attention for the league.
Player that plays for Chicago Fire, Xherdan Shaqiri, how has he adapted to life in the MLS?
Shaqiri has struggled a little bit. I, just getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of the Fire. That I think the Fire might have overpaid a little bit for him. I don't know that there was any real competition for Shaqiri when he was available. A year and a half ago, he had some instances where he was okay last year, but I think this year he struggled. He had a very good game the last game, but up until then he had not recorded a goal or assist this year. Last year he was sort of focused on participating in the World Cup, so it was sort of evident that the Fire were kind of his secondary attention. He's been injured on and off this year. He's never really been the main guy in any team he's been. So he's sort of followed suit here with the Fire. He's not. He's he hasn't been exactly what I think the Fire were expecting when he got here.
As well as Shaqiri, obviously Gareth Bale went to MLS to get minutes before the World Cup. Do you think LA was his second home?
Yeah, that seemed like a kind of like a final stop for Gareth Bale, and I think he scored a goal in MLS Cup, and I think he retired. He's probably off golfing somewhere now. But yeah, Gareth Bale was there to, and I think that was one guy that some people call a retirement league, and I think that was one guy who was just, hey, let me go to America and take a final stop and see what happens. LAFC was a good fit for him. He didn't have to be one of the main guys at LAFC. He fit in perfectly there, scored for them in MLS Cup, and they got exactly what they wanted to get out of him. So,
what do you think makes MLS unique compared to like other leagues around the world?
Yeah, MLS is unique because they operate under a salary structure that makes it more difficult to bring in more than three really high profile, high salary players. So you've got a budget to balance that most of the other leagues don't really have to deal with. So you only have X amount of dollars to spend on very high profile players like you mentioned, Ibrahimovic or David Beckham, and the rest of your team you have to fill into salary slots in order to reach a salary budget. So it's not as easy to build good teams as it is to, in the Premier League, for instance, to just go out and spend to bring players in. That's held them back from competing on the main stage. Part of that is that they have smaller TV revenue, so the individual teams haven't had the money to spend on players like that. They're on Apple TV. They got a pretty substantial deal from Apple TV for the TV rights, so they're streaming online only. I think that'll help them take the next step. I think until they're able to start competing financially with some of the bigger clubs overseas, you're going to see MLS sort of be a second tier league. And right now, they're essentially a feeder league for the bigger leagues in Europe, and that's not a bad thing because I think most leagues in Europe are feeder leagues for the bigger leagues in Europe. But in terms of competing with them internationally, until they are able to spend commensurate to what the best teams overseas, and they're not going to, they're not going to be a top flight league.
Talk about the MLS being a feeder league for leagues in Europe. Obviously, we had Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David come from the MLS into Europe. How important do you think those players are to put respect on the MLS name for people outside America?
Yeah, those guys. Yeah, those guys are very important. I mean, that when you're a player, you're growing up playing the game, that's all. Your ultimate goal is to play against the best and to play in the biggest leagues in the world. Guys like Alphonso Davies he's the best player for Canada. The Fire here locally just sold two players for substantial amounts of money. The goalkeeper Gaga Solomina went to Chelsea. They just sold the forward last year as well. So it's very important that some of these guys see MLS as a destination where, hey, if we do well here, we can achieve our dream of getting to the Premier League or Serie A or any of the bigger leagues in Europe. I think it's important to establish it as sort of I don't know about a stepping stone, but sort of a league that is seen as somewhere where you can go to develop and eventually cash in for the big dream eventually.
Do you think those fees help MLS clubs to survive and reinvest into better players like Gareth Bale or Ibrahimovic?
The players of the player sales?
Yeah, like selling Alphonso Davies or Jonathan David and then being able to invest that money and back into the squad.
Yeah. Being able to invest that money back into the squad is important, but they're still operating within a salary structure. So all of the money that you get back from, let's say, a $15 million sale for a guy like Gaga Solomina doesn't go back. You don't have $15 million to spend on players. A portion of that goes back in your into your operations budget. A portion goes into what you can spend under the cap. So I'd like to see them eventually loosen that up so that some of the teams that are successful in selling players to Europe for those high dollar amounts are able to reinvest that back into the club completely for player salaries if they choose so. And that's one of the things that they have to decide on, whether or not at some point in the near future they actually allow clubs to do that in order to take that next step.
You talk about the salary cap. What else do you think the MLS can like improve on to help it to be a respected league and a more competitive league in the future?
Yeah, I think they're taking a lot of those steps. They've spent the last decade or so building up their academy teams and sort of developing football culture throughout the younger players as they come up through a system. Teams like the Philadelphia Union have established an academy that is basically like a Hogwarts for soccer players. They bring them up from a young age and they house them. They've got school there for them. That's potentially the future of how academies are run here in America. But they're investing in the youth and investing in academies and training in order to bring these players up sort of enmeshed in that culture so that when they get to MLS or they have an opportunity to go overseas, they have the same amount of experience or playing time or training that kids their age might have overseas as well. That they're one of the things that I see with I have friends that grew up in Brazil. They grew up with a ball at their feet from the time they could walk. And here you can see a lot of kids grow up with a basketball or a baseball from the time they start playing sports. You're starting to see that here with soccer, where youth sports is starting to be inundated with soccer fields all over the place. Soccer is becoming a very, very popular sport with youth and with communities here in the States. It might be the top youth sport now. It will be soon if it's not now.
You think that's important from changing the culture from basketball, baseball, like you said, into soccer?
Yeah, it's nice to have choices. There's a lot of choices here. I mean, we're sort of sports fans are sort of lucky here in the U.S. with a multitude of high profile sports to choose from. And like I said, baseball and football and the NHL, Major League Baseball, NBA, those leagues have been around for 100 years now. So they've had a chance to develop all of that following and develop all of those, have all of those kids grow up wanting to, aspiring to play in the NHL or the NBA. You're starting to see that now, even with in MLS. You see some of the kids that were growing up 20 years ago were as MLS fans, and they're starting to come up with, hey, I used to watch the Fire when I was a kid in in Illinois, and now they're in the academy system and playing for the Fire. So it's that growth is generational, and MLS has only been around 23, 24 years now, so it's going to take some time for that to catch up. But you're starting to see that trickle come in.
As well as obviously having players developing at an early age, do you think it hinders the MLS where compared to NBA and other sports that players can go out overseas and the competition better compared to like the NBA where you go overseas the competition is much worse?
Yeah, I don't know if it hinders. I obviously do like to keep all the best players here, but it helps. It may not help MLS immediately, but it does help the national team if some of the players here at a young age are identified and they go to play overseas against some of the best in the world in their age group, and they eventually work their way up to the national team. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Maybe MLS doesn't have the benefit of having those kids in their academy growing up, but again, the national team is benefiting by some of those players going overseas early before even playing in MLS, and there is a lot of that. I think the importance of the national team and the success of the national team in high-profile tournaments may be even more important than the MLS. So it helps and it hurts, but you want your players to grow up playing against the best, and if they're able to do that, I don't see a downside to it, at least in terms of soccer in the States.
You talk about the national team in America. How important are the 2026 World Cup having the hosting rights, Canada, Mexico, and America help the development of the young generation?
Yeah, it's very important. We've seen World Cups impact the popularity of the game here every 4 years. MLS itself is a result of the World Cup coming to the States in 1994. And it was formed with a promise to FIFA that we'll develop a professional league if we get the World Cup. So the World Cups here, and I've said for a long time that eventually getting it back into the States is going to be a huge attraction for MLS because it's going to draw more eyes to the game. It's going to show people who aren't particularly familiar here in the States, and there's still a little bit of the old guard who just doesn't like soccer, sees it as a foreign game. There's a lot of that, but yeah, the World Cup and drawing attention. If the national team is successful, it only helps MLS. I think the World Cups and hosting the World Cups are big opportunities for MLS to take that next step up.
You see the development of like the younger generation take inspiration from obviously the Americans, the USA team, Mexico team, and Canada team in the 2022 World Cup in Qatar.
Yeah, you're starting to see it. My kids are young now. I've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they've grown up with soccer. But you're starting to see that the kids in their class are talking about Ronaldo. They're talking about Messi. They're talking about the World Cup the way that we used to talk about, Michael Jordan or the Bulls or Dr. J or, Walter Payton when we were growing up. So the MLS players and more so the European stars like Messi are front and center. And a lot of that might have to do with video games as well with the success of FIFA. But this last World Cup seemed to really draw more attention for younger kids, from what I can tell.
You talk about Michael Jordan. How being someone from Indiana, how important was like the MJ and Reggie Miller rivalry in the late 90s?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Indiana, but I live 30 minutes from the United Center where the Bulls used to play. And Reggie Miller played in Indianapolis, which is probably a 3.5-hour drive for me. So I was always a Bulls fan, and wasn't exactly I wasn't exactly cheering for Reggie Miller. But yeah, by the NBA and the Bulls, those were exciting times because they were close regional rivals. But living in the Chicago area, I had a chance to see Jordan live. I got a chance to see NBA playoff games with Jordan, and that is probably the height of sporting excellence. I don't know that it can get much better than that guy in terms of what we'll see here locally. But yeah, it was fun.
What was it like going to a Michael Jordan game? Obviously, watching The Last Dance, being someone from the UK, you see how important, how impactful Jordan was. But how was that like being in that environment and atmosphere?
Yeah, it's funny when you watch it, just kind of seeing it live, and then you look at it afterward. Because I think over time you sort of start to maybe not lose the memory of how good they were, but you start to look at, oh boy, that happened. Those guys were that good, and it's difficult if you didn't live through it to imagine how good those players were. And it's hard, it's hard for me to go back and say, I wonder how good Wilt Chamberlain is. I can watch videos, and I can look at his numbers after the fact, but I think if you you experience it while it's happening, go back and look at it after the fact, you kind of appreciate more what you're watching when it happens. If you, for example, watching Messi now, you kind of appreciate Messi for what he's able to do now because, hey, you watched Michael Jordan do it, and you may not. It may be a long time before you see someone who's able to do something like that again.
You think someone like a Leo Messi is like you see people compare NBA stars like Michael Jordan to Leo Messi? Do you think they're the most similar comparison you can make, or is it a Cristiano Ronaldo?
Yeah, all those players, Ronaldo, Ibrahimovic, even the younger guys who are playing now, they're all great in their own way. I grew up watching Pele as well, and he was fantastic, and Maradona was fantastic. So it's kind of all a matter of personal taste or opinion, whoever you might think is the best you've seen, or whoever you think might be the GOAT or the greatest player of all time. You kind of have to take each one of those guys and appreciate them for what they can do individually, because they're all a little different.
Well, being able to watch arguably the four greatest players of all time, how would you rank them from the GOAT to fourth?
For me, Messi is still one. Maradona two. Ronaldo, Pele.
Do you think Messi and Maradona, being able to watch them both, have the most similar play styles?
Yes. Yeah, maybe I'm a little more partial to the Argentines. Yeah, they're very similar. You see a lot of that, and you see that some of the players that now, like Messi in particular, they watched those guys and they were able to take some of those traits from watching those players, even from the NBA. And you watch LeBron or Kobe Bryant, by watching them that they watched Jordan and they watched Magic Johnson, and they've taken a little bit of those games and incorporated into their own and sort of created their own style. It's the same with soccer or every other sport. There's a little bit that those great players take from the great players before them that they kind of mold into their own.
You think that's important? Obviously, you talk about Michael Jordan, Kobe, and LeBron, and that three styles. You got kind of in football, you got Messi, Ronaldo, now Mbappe and Haaland taking over the throne. Do you think it's important to have those players before them?
Yeah. All of that's important. They're if you watch tapes from black and white tapes from Pelé playing, and the game doesn't seem as fast. I don't know if that's just because of I don't know if it's the evolution of the talent or training, or you see the game sort of go to different levels over the decades. And again, not being able to see it live, you can't appreciate it going back and looking at it. You can just look at the video or look at the numbers. But yeah, that evolution and that talent, it seems like these guys can do more as the decades go by, and it seems like the sky is the limit in terms of how far these guys can develop.
Moving back to football in America, who would you say is the most supported team outside of America, European club?
There are several teams that seem to have very very ardent and a lot of numbers in support. Los Angeles FC, who just came into the league a few years ago, it helps that they are the best team in the league over the last 3 years. So Seattle has always had a very good following. Atlanta is a more recent team with a good following. Some of the young guys, some of the teams that are relatively new, seem to have more success in developing larger followings immediately. Seattle, I think, is one that developed a large following, and they've stayed. Portland has done the same as well. All of those teams are all, I think, relatively popular, extremely popular within their regions. Overall, I don't think in terms of the entirety of the United States that there's one MLS team that's, like the New York Yankees or the Dallas Cowboys, but they're all very popular in their own markets within their own rights.
You think that's important, like regional clubs being the most popular in their regional states, like you said, LA, Seattle, clubs like that, being able to have that following in their state is more important than having it.
It's important to sort of establish that hey, there is a market for this here. You look at Los Angeles, it's like Chicago, it's a very crowded sports market. They've got 2 NFL teams, they've got NBA teams, hockey teams. So there's a lot of competition for the sporting eyes, if you will, in each one of those markets. And I think MLS is holding their own. It's important that they can show that, hey, we can establish a foothold here and start to establish some roots with the fan base.
What do you think of previously talking about the 2026 World Cup being in North America? What do you think fans can expect from that World Cup?
Well, they're going to have to share with Mexico and Canada, so all the games won't be here. Um, One thing that the World Cup in '94 did was exposed the game to people who weren't familiar with it and said, "Wow, this is great! The crowd is alive. These games are exciting. Soccer may not be as boring as I think it is. Just the overall exposure. If you uh, watch the way that it's covered in the United States now, it has the feel of a big event, has the feel of something that's important that you want to watch, that you can't miss. So all of that goes into growing the game. That's 2026 World Cup. I can't overstate how important that's going to be for the growth of the game.
You think it hurts teams with it being spread across three countries, the travel fatigue that some countries might face during the World Cup?
Yeah, the MLS teams have that to deal with here because the United States, and we've got teams in Canada as well. The United States is so big that there is a lot of travel. There's more travel than you would have if you were a Premier League team where uh, everyone is relatively close and you don't have to travel. You don't have to fly 5 hours to get from Chicago to LA for a Fire versus Galaxy game. Travel here because the country's so big has always been a problem. It's a problem for the NBA teams who fly back and forth. Baseball, it's the same. So yeah, travel's a little bit of an issue, but they won't have problems selling out each one of those games in each one of the markets. I think the group stages they'll be in one location until they go to the next round. So it probably won't affect them too much. It's more of an issue if you're traveling constantly over the course of a season and it starts to wear on you. But I don't know that it'll be a big issue for the World Cup.
You think it will hurt fans? Obviously, in the financial cost, like you said, Chicago to LA, a 5 hour flight. Do you think it will hurt the fan attendance for like European fans to come to America?
No, European teams have come here and have drawn large crowds. Manchester United was here to play the Fire 5, 6 years ago, and they had 65,000 people in Soldier Field. Some of these bigger, well-known teams, when they come here, they have no problem drawing large crowds. The novelty has started to wear off a little bit. Some of the lesser teams have come over and not drawn as big a crowd. Everton's been here, and the crowds have been smaller. And when the big teams come over, Real Madrid, Manchester United, Barcelona, those teams draw. They have a tremendous fan base here that is used to watching them because they can watch their games online now. So they've developed a following over the years. Those teams have no issue drawing big crowds here.
Remember in 2016 when Leicester won the Premier League, they went out to America for a pre-season tour. Do you think that was important for Leicester after the fairy tale story to go out to America?
Yeah, I mean, America loves underdogs and love fairy tale stories like that. I don't remember what the draw was like for Leicester when they came over, but they love the idea of Wrexham. And if you follow the Wrexham story at all, they love that because of the underdog story, and you've got American involvement there in the ownership. Yeah, I mean, people eat that stuff up over here. They love it.
Jesse March, obviously being from America, what do you think of him being maybe one of the most successful American coaches to come overseas?
Yeah, I would like to see him get a little bit longer shot when he goes. I don't think he got a really long look at Leeds. And that's kind of the nature of the sport over there, and managers that are in and out. I think Jesse Marsh eventually, if he's not the head coach of the men's national team, will be back in Europe at some point. Bob Bradley was overseas as well, and he's not coach of Toronto FC, coach the Fire. So yeah, it's important to see some of these American coaches go over and have success in the European leagues or in overseas, because it shows that the American soccer system, football system, can develop managers who are equal level with those overseas.
Do you think it helps America having cheaper getting your coaching badges? It's much more cheaper in America than it is compared to like somewhere in England.
Yeah, that does help. Yeah, the process of the coaching badges I don't want to say, I guess it's kind of a play on words. It's the badge of honor for some of these guys to go through and earn the coaching badges. You see that it's not as difficult for some of the players. As soon as they retire, they go right into the coaching and they are able to earn their badges. And some of them here in Chicago have worked their way up to one guy in particular, Gonzalo Sagares, who was a left back for the Fire, retired, worked his way up through the Fire Academy. Now he's the coach of the U.S. U17s. So you see some of that where players are coming through, earning their badges and advancing through the ranks as well. I think that's important for development as well. It's almost as important as developing players is developing those coaches who can pass on that knowledge to the players too.
You talk about the players going into coaching. Do you think it's important for them to pass on their experience to, like you said, an under-17 team when they've played at the highest level?
Yeah. Some of the players that have come through the U.S. grew up with soccer over, in another country that was very soccer centric, came here at a young age and started to play and started to develop it here. So you're passing along a soccer culture from another country and kind of showing players that you play with how it's done, and then imparting that over to academy kids or young players who are coming up through your system. All of that, and sort of sharing, like I said, soccer culture that may be different in Argentina or Costa Rica or Brazil, and immersing and meshing all of that with the way that we do it here in the States. That's very important. It's good to have a different set of eyes on another style that is a little bit different than the American coaches, who I think started here with sort of a football mentality, of American football mentality of, hey, we have to grind, we have to hit, we have to play hard. And that sort of changed into a more technical game over the years.
Do you find it, the MLS, with having South American players, people from Mexico, Canada, and Costa Rica, coming into the MLS, do you find you get like a mix of different cultures?
Yeah, every team in MLS has a different mix of cultures, and it's nice to have that comparison. You can see guys that are coming from different parts of the world, and sort of watching how they integrate themselves in the teams in MLS. Because the MLS game is a little bit different. It's very fast. It's physical, not always pretty. But as you watch some of the players come over who are more technically gifted and start to integrate themselves into the league, you start to see how that is helping develop the league from the inside, basically.
I think it was important with obviously Miguel Almiron coming in, and then Joseph Martinez at Atlanta United. It was important to have those two players.
Yeah, guys like Almiron. I mean, that's and another guy who was able to earn a big transfer fee and then have some success outside of MLS once he was sold. Martinez, I think, got hurt, and he's still in MLS. But having those guys come over and have success, and then move on and have success, that's also important, because it's an advertisement for the league that, like I said before, you can come to MLS, succeed, and then earn a big deal in one of the bigger leagues if you're successful. So yeah, those are all important.
I've been a journalist, an MLS journalist. How do you get into soccer initially and soccer journalism? Because back then it would have been more of a wide call compared to other sports.
Yeah. Well, I grew up just outside of Chicago, and when I was 10 years old, and a younger player, the only thing that was really available to me for youth sports was basketball, baseball, football. And soccer didn't exist in terms of youth sports the way that it does now, where it's everywhere here in the States. So I just happened to grow an affinity for the Chicago Sting of the old NASL, and I started following them there as the landscape of soccer changed here. The NASL ended up folding, and less than a decade later, MLS took its place with the advent of the '94 World Cup. So in '94, MLS started. The Fire started in '96. I started following them then as the league started to progress. There were more outlets that started covering the Fire. There was an opportunity to cover them through a website called Chicago Now, and the writer who initially was covering them for Chicago now ended up working for MLS. A position opened up. I ended up with a position, and that's how I got into soccer journalism and covering football here in the States. So back then, maybe 12, 13 years ago, the journalistic landscape was also different. It wasn't as crowded as it is now. It's more developed now, along with the game. There are more people covering it. It's taken more seriously. You've got ESPN covering it more seriously. Fox Sports covers it more seriously. So it's grown along with the league as well.
You think that's important as well as the players, coach developing, the journalists and media aspects developing too?
Yeah. That part of there's an old guard here in the States media, even some of the older markets that are very provincial, like Chicago. Some of the bigger media outlets don't cover soccer because they don't know a lot about it. And the guys who are sort of entrenched in American football and the NBA and baseball don't want to take the time to learn something else because that's they know the other stuff. They've been covering that stuff for years. So it's important to start, like I said, even developing journalists who know the game, understand the game, the same way that you have players who grow up with the game. It's nice to have journalists who can speak about it intelligently and can actually impart some of that, I guess, knowledge into people who are hungry for that sort of coverage. You're starting to see that, like I said, develop along with the league.
During the summer, the MLS takes break from the 15th of July to the 24th of August, I believe. How do you find that as a journalist, that break?
What was that again?
The break during the summer, I believe it's the 15th of July to 24th of August, where league play stops. How do you find that as a journalist?
Oh yeah, I mean, in terms of covering it,
yeah,
the league take, but most of the teams have players that are playing on the international level. So the guys who are usually covering the teams locally will cover the players who are playing internationally, or sites like the Athletic, who I wrote for, covering the Fire. They do a good job of covering international games well. So because the teams, MLS teams, are on breaks, doesn't necessarily mean the journalists are taking a break as well. They're usually covering international games. Some of the international games that come here, the U.S. team usually tours here locally. So the local writers, more often than not, are also covering the U.S. national team.
Obviously, we previously mentioned about players from America moving to Europe. Who do you think's next destined for a big money move?
I would have said Joseph Martinez before he got hurt. The player for Atlanta United, Thiago Almada, at some point is going to make a big money move. I'm sure that he'll be the next one.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Ricky Pugh with the Galaxy might be one as well, but Almada would definitely be one to look at.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Guillermo. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anytime.
Thank you.